Hi, I want to talk about Tradwives. No shade to stay-at-home moms generally. This is about the ones that condone taking choices away from other women, especially voting. That's bad enough, but as the title of this video suggests, it's even worse than that. I'm Jennifer Dawn, and I'm an ex-Evangelical Conservative, sharing my experiences and my opinions about things. So this whole Tradwife business that some self-described homemakers are making a lot of money from, I want to do my part to help folks be clear-eyed about what's going on here when it comes to their desire to deny our right to vote, as well as the role patriarchy plays more broadly within any culture. Before I dive in, for any conservatives that may be watching this, I know most of you are already objecting, insisting that it's not racism for you. It's just a difference in policy. Once upon a time, I was right there with you, and I would have shut down if someone suggested that was the basis of my beliefs. I hope you'll bear with me. I'm going to circle back to this point. First, though, in order to understand the bigger picture, I want to start with the women who represent its base. I don't doubt that some of the women saying they're ready to give up their vote are true believers. And by true believers, I mean women who were mostly socialized within a patriarchal culture to believe that they're inferior, to shrink themselves, and to fear freedom and the responsibilities that come with it. It's kind of like Stockholm Syndrome. These are women who, whether they're raised up that way or become captured by that belief system, are trained to be controlled by men lest they offend God himself. And therefore, they're trained to advocate that all women should be controlled. Any presumption that this is something they freely choose is a little generous. It's worth interjecting here with a quick vocabulary lesson. The Christianese word to describe this type of unequal relationship is called complementarian. The opposite biblical view that endorses equality between the genders is called egalitarian. About 10 to 15 years ago, I dabbled in complementarianism, but now I'm egalitarian. And candidly, to the extent that I briefly lived in that headspace as an evangelical conservative, I realize now that any thought I humored about submitting myself to some sort of dependent relationship, which is the ultimate goal of the worst complementarians, i.e. Doug Wilson, that was a result of my perfectly reasonable aversion to the social and economic system that exists. Because it doesn't just inherently favor men, it's also apathetic and unmerciful. That's why the world needs women actively engaging in the system rather than retreating from it, to help it evolve into something that's more sympathetic and merciful. And that's why some men don't want us in it. They want domination and exploitation to be the norm as long as it continues to benefit them. That said, my instinct is that most of these women are embracing this idea purely as a matter of convenience because they happen to agree with their husband's politics at this moment in time, and they foolishly assume that they always will. That is why most of these women are also relatively young. I'd bet it's fairly rare that genuinely submissive complementarian marriages don't devolve into something ugly or empty that women eventually regret or want to escape from. As I say that, keep in mind there are also a lot of couples that claim to be complementarian who don't truly act it out in all of its biblical glory. Similarly, you won't see a genuinely submissive complementarian woman on any stage or social platform commanding attention. Those women especially remind me of Serena Joy in The Handmaid's Tale. Here's the deal. Regardless of which camp these women are coming from, they already have the freedom, ironically, to choose to give their husbands their vote. No one is stopping them. They can implore their pale manly men for voting instructions. I do declare, won't you please tell me how I should vote? I'm just too childish to make a decision like that for myself. Seriously, as it currently stands, these women can do what they claim they want to do and still leave the door open to change their minds, or perhaps just play along if they want to. But denying votes to all women achieves a bigger purpose because it negates the votes of the greater number of women whose politics they disagree with. That's the vast majority of Black and brown women, and a disproportionate number of traitorous white women compared to white men who disrupt the demographics by reducing the white majority's voting power. And when you consider the higher incarceration rates of Black and brown men that prevent them from participating in democracy, that's a pretty sweet deal for the right. So where am I getting this from? Part of it's my firsthand account from when I was active in conservative politics about 15 years ago. There was a palpable fear among Republican politicos about well-publicized changing demographics in which white people were going to lose their majority status in the near future. It was a real sense of impending doom. To the degree that they were paying attention, Republican voters feared it too. That fear was elevated immensely by the election of the first Black president, and then exponentially with the passage of the Affordable Care Act, which the GOP has been trying to undo ever since. Seriously, y'all, I actually cried when the ACA passed. I thought communism was just around the corner because health care was more affordable for poor people and self-employed people. I still resent that I let right-wing talking heads rob me of the joy of celebrating the first Black president. And as upset as they were about Obama, can you imagine the brick they were shitting over the possibility of the first woman president in 2016? And then facing that again with a Black woman in 2024? That's also when I remember the right starting to sow the seeds of doubt about democracy. There was a video back then that went viral among the Tea Party crowd that explained to them in a very authoritative voice that we are not a democracy. The U.S. is a republic. The vast majority of these people were just fine with democracy when they thought white people would always hold a majority. Changing demographics meant that we were approaching a tipping point in which the GOP would never hold real power again without either softening their policies or figuring out how to win over non-white voters and women with sound arguments and evidence, which was something I was personally deeply invested in. I truly believed right-wing policies were the most effective policies for everyone in terms of both economics and freedom. I thought Democrat voters were shooting themselves in the foot, and I wanted to figure out how to message that effectively. I was incredibly naive on multiple levels, especially considering the GOP plan was to just undermine democracy. And fear, of course, is such an effective weapon to get your foot in the door so you can put that kind of plan into action. The right weaponizes incendiary tropes about abortion and immigrants and Muslims and trans people for the sole purpose of inviting prejudice against any non-homogenous individuals. I'm going to say that again for emphasis. They inflame fear to normalize prejudice. Side note, I believe the real fear for conservative white men regarding the trans community is unknowingly being attracted to a trans woman. And I can't forget commies. They're going to whip out the McCarthyism playbook. Would you like a side of Red Scare with your midterms? By the way, did you know McCarthy aggressively defended SS soldiers who were convicted of unaliving 150 captured American troops in the Malmedy massacre? Imagine that. Once the right effectively exploits fear to get into office, they invoke archaic immigration policies that overwhelmingly target non-whites, threaten birthright citizenship for the children of those non-white immigrants, shut out non-white refugees and asylum seekers, gerrymander non-white voters out of representation, and threaten women's suffrage, along with any other voter they deem a threat to their power, per the SAVE Act and these absurd new terrorist guidelines. All of those things are about overcoming those changing demographics and cementing long-term power for white voters and the party that exploits them. For as much as the right accuses the left of leveraging identity politics, they absolutely rely on fueling grievances with white and Christian voters. So back to conservatives who insist that it's not about race. As I noted, I've been there myself. And my question for you is, when you think about the obvious racial divide in U.S. politics, do you assume there must be something about the experience of people of color that you should try to understand better? Or do you assume they're just not as smart as you and all the other primarily white right-wing voters, that dark-skinned voters just don't know better? When you think about the fact that people of color are disproportionately poorer and disproportionately imprisoned, do you wonder if there are elements within our culture and systems that are unjust? Or do you assume they must generally be inferior or more immoral than white people? I know some of you have been convinced by right-wing pundits that it's left-wing policies that have caused harm to minority communities. But if that's the case, shouldn't those same policies impact white populations in equal proportion? The best answer you could give to those questions is that you just hadn't thought about it that hard. At one point, I hadn't thought that hard about it either. And assuming that's the case, because you're not like people who wear white hoods, I hope you'll give it some more thought. That reminds me of one of my favorite quips from conservatives when it comes to debates about policies that are related to inequality, especially wealth inequality. They're just jealous. Well, let your supremacy flag fly, Regina George. There's no such thing as inequality. They're just jealous of me. By the way, did you know that propaganda in World War II Germany targeted women with the slogan, Kinderkuchenkirche? I probably butchered that, but it's German for Children Kitchen Church. Children Kitchen Church. Children Kitchen Church. Can you imagine a rally where people just keep saying that over and over again? Sadly, I kind of can right now, unfortunately. Anyway, it communicated to women that it was their patriotic duty to birth lots of babies for the master race and a plentiful supply of future soldiers. Tell me that's not a Tradwife message. It's weird how the GOP has also been trying to convince white people to have more babies. What a coincidence. That actually brings me to the most important point I want to make here. So far, I've talked about this as a direct witness from my own personal experience in politics. It's my testimony for the plaintiff. But when you zoom out and look at the whole witness of history, you see that sexism and racism and other forms of prejudice are historically and culturally intertwined. After all, if you can embrace and defend the idea that half the human population should submit to the other half based on whether they're born with a peach or an eggplant, it's not a big leap to base any judgment on superficial traits such as race. And then race often becomes the easiest catalyst for prejudice based on culture, nationality, ethnicity, religion, etc. Social scientists and historians have explained and documented how this works for decades, but folks on the right don't want to hear it. They try to keep it out of classrooms and debates. They slap derogatory labels on it because it challenges the perfect, pretty narratives that they've connected their identity to, which isn't healthy in any case. That's cult behavior even when it's a pleasant cult. But when it's based on suppressing the truth, on bullshit, it's destructive. When citizens can't look at the country they love, the good and the bad, warts and all, and acknowledge it for what it is for the sake of always working towards something better, that's when a country is doomed. So out of curiosity, I wanted to see what Google's AI summary says when you ask if patriarchy and racism are historically linked. Here's a few noteworthy excerpts. Yes, there is a profound historical connection between patriarchy and racism. Sociologists, historians, and scholars such as the late Bell Hooks, remember that name, view these structures not in isolation but as mutually reinforcing systems of dominance. That word's going to come up a lot as I keep reading. Patriarchy and racialized hierarchy have coexisted for millennia. Ancient empires frequently used the same logic to legitimize both, categorizing certain bodies as inherently subordinate, naturally designed for servitude, or lesser human beings. During European colonization, these old patriarchal foundations were weaponized to justify racial slavery. Then I asked more generally if patriarchy and racism are connected. Yes, patriarchy and racism are deeply intertwined, often reinforcing each other through shared systems of dominance. Theorists use the term intersectionality to describe how gender, race, and other social identities overlap to create unique forms of discrimination that cannot be understood in isolation. Systems like chattel slavery and colonial expansion were built on both white supremacy and strict gender hierarchies. The oppression of minority groups often relies on weaponizing gender. Women of color frequently face misogynoir, a specific intersection of racism and sexism. Michelle Obama has, of course, been the most obvious subject of that kind of hate. While folks on the right hate academic words like intersectionality that describe the historical and cultural relationship between patriarchy and racism, intersectionality is why Black women understand oppression better than most anyone in this country, and why someone like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, a Black woman and Muslim born in Somali, is so despised by the right. It's not just because she expressed support for Palestinians. I'm playing catch-up myself, learning about these concepts, which is how I found my way to a scholarly reference from Dorothy Roberts. She's a professor of law and sociology. I'll link the essay in the description because I want to share some quotes from it. Racism and patriarchy are not two separate institutions that intersect only in the lives of Black women. They are two interrelated, mutually supporting systems of domination, and their relationship is essential to understanding the subordination of all women. Racism is patriarchal. Patriarchy is racist. We will not destroy one institution without destroying the other. Roberts closes this piece with a quote from Bell Hooks, who was mentioned earlier. Hooks is the author of the 2002 book Communion, which was just one of Hooks' works that became foundational to these discussions. I also want to close with that quote in a few moments. But after briefly exploring the book, I first want to share some summaries about the book. In the highly celebrated book Communion, feminist theorist and author Bell Hooks argues that the patriarchy socializes women to believe that they must earn love by conforming to oppressed beauty standards and serving others. The book examines the way societal conditioning, feminism, and patriarchy impact women's ability to give and receive love, ultimately asserting that true love is an act of courage and self-actualization. Because girls learn to associate female worth with patriarchal approval and physical appearance, they often operate from a place of deficit, seeking external validation rather than inner fulfillment. True communion, whether in romantic partnerships or platonic friendships, requires women to first develop a strong sense of self. I find it hard to imagine that most women reading just those few brief words wouldn't find them incredibly relatable. I certainly did. And this is where I get to talk about J.D. Vance. As if he isn't insufferable enough, he's seemingly attempting to co-opt and undermine the legacy of Hooks's book by using the same title for his new book about finding his way back to conservative patriarchal religion. Can we all please rush out and buy a copy of Hooks' book to push it past Vance's on the top sellers list? My copy just arrived. So here's that closing quote from Bell Hooks. To me, feminism is not simply a struggle to end male chauvinism or a movement to ensure that women will have equal rights with men. It's a commitment to eradicating the ideology of domination that permeates Western culture on various levels: sex, race, and class, to name a few. In summary, the Tradwife sales pitch for patriarchy and for rolling back the gains women have made is part of a bigger desire to maintain all of the systems of domination that have served any of its benefactors. Doing it under the pretense of their Christian beliefs allows them to try to talk about it in a practical biblical context that doesn't sound quite as bad as simply being prejudiced dickheads. Ultimately, no one should be naive about what the most passionate among them, who see it as their civic and godly duty, would do to protect their majority status and the false sense of security that manufactured domination gives them. For too many of them, the ends justifies the means. I hope more nuanced Republican voters, which hopefully represents a lot of Republican voters, are starting to see that for what it is. For all those flag and eagle memes, what they're selling isn't freedom, and it represents the worst of America. The warts, not its values. That's all for now. That was actually a lot. By the way, this is my first video ever. Please help the algorithm with a like and subscribe if you want to see more. FYI, I hope to do a video soon that explains the name I chose for this channel. One last thing. I'll occasionally share some favorite content creators that I've learned from about the topic at hand, especially for anyone coming from the right who might be interested in some additional resources. This week I have too many, but I'm going to share them all anyway. First is the Bare Marriage podcast with Sheila Gregoire. She's a sociologist and author that talks about healthy marriages. especially between the sheets. She uses science and facts to challenge popular Christian relationship books that have a heavy complementarian slant, which is most of them. Tia Livings is the author of A Well-Trained Wife, which is about her escape from high-control Christian patriarchy. And the last one is Therese Lee. She's my favorite go-to on all things feminism. I'll drop the YouTube links for each below, but they're all on multiple platforms. Thanks for hanging out. See you in the next one.